The city of New Haven glittered beneath a gray morning sky, its towering steel spires reaching so high that they disappeared into the clouds. Flying cargo lanes crisscrossed overhead while silent drones carried crates between massive factories that never stopped working. To the millions of people living in the city, life seemed ordinary. They believed humanity's greatest technological achievement was artificial intelligence and fusion power. No one knew that beneath the city's western district, hidden behind blast doors thicker than bank vaults, lay Project Black Vault, a military facility built to study technology that did not come from Earth. For nearly 30 years, governments around the world had secretly recovered fragments of crashed alien vessels buried beneath deserts, oceans, and glaciers. Most of the discoveries were lifeless machines or damaged equipment, but one discovery changed everything. Deep inside Black Vault's lowest laboratory rested a living alien guardian designated AX-9. To the scientists, he was not a person. He was a priceless experiment. Inside a brightly lit containment chamber, thick energy barriers surrounded a tall silver and black machine kneeling silently on the cold floor. His once elegant armor was scarred by years of dismantling and testing. Fine blue lines that had once glowed across his body now flickered weakly like dying embers. Mechanical restraints locked his wrists and ankles while dozens of cables disappeared into the open cavity in his chest. Standing behind reinforced glass, Colonel Victor Kane watched the latest diagnostic report scroll across a holographic screen. "No response?" he asked calmly. A senior scientist shook her head. "His neural network continues resisting every extraction attempt. We still cannot access the Architect archive." Kane folded his arms. "Then continue. Humanity cannot afford ignorance. If another civilization returns, we must be ready." The scientist hesitated before quietly replying, "Sir, we've removed nearly every component except his central core. If we keep pushing, the unit may never recover." Kane stared through the glass at the silent guardian. "He's a machine, Doctor. Machines can be rebuilt." Far beyond the shining city towers, 13-year-old Mira tightened the straps of an old backpack as she stepped into the endless scrapyards surrounding New Haven. Mountains of discarded machines stretched farther than she could see. Broken delivery drones, rusted construction robots, cracked solar panels, tangled wiring, and abandoned vehicles formed metallic hills beneath circling scavenger birds. While most people considered the junkyard worthless, Mira saw opportunity. Every damaged machine contained screws, circuits, motors, and batteries that could be repaired or sold. Her father had taught her that before he died in a mining collapse 5 years earlier. Even now she could almost hear his cheerful voice. "Look carefully, Mira. Every broken machine is trying to tell you what's wrong. Listen before you fix." She smiled sadly at the memory and gently picked up a damaged service drone. "Let's see what's bothering you today," she whispered. Kneeling beside it, she pulled a worn toolbox from her backpack and began replacing a burnt circuit board with one salvaged from another drone. After several careful minutes, the little machine's eyes flickered to life. It buzzed happily before hovering into the air. Mira laughed softly. "There you go. You're not ready for the scrap pile yet." By sunset, she had earned enough credits selling repaired electronics to buy bread and canned soup for dinner. Instead of returning to the crowded worker apartments, she walked toward the edge of the scrapyard where an abandoned repair garage leaned against a hill of rusting metal. The workshop had once belonged to her father. Dust covered every workbench, but she refused to sell the place. It was the only home she had left. Inside, faded blueprints still hung on cracked walls, and old tools rested exactly where her father had left them. She carefully placed her toolbox on the main bench and quietly said, "I'm home, Dad." Silence answered her, as it always did. Several kilometers away, alarms suddenly exploded throughout Project Black Vault. Red emergency lights flashed across sterile corridors as automated doors slammed shut. Scientists ran between control stations shouting over blaring sirens. "Containment breach," one technician yelled. "Unit AX-9 has escaped Sector 12. Colonel Kane looked at the security monitors in disbelief. The footage showed another damaged alien machine forcing open a maintenance corridor before deliberately overloading its own reactor. The explosion destroyed several security systems but also obliterated the machine itself. In the confusion, AX-9 had broken free from his restraints. Barely able to stand, he staggered through smoke-filled corridors while automated defense turrets fired bursts of blue plasma around him. "Seal every exit," Kane ordered. "Deploy hunter drones. Recover the Guardian intact." Ax-9 reached an underground vehicle bay just as heavy blast doors began closing. His damaged processors calculated hundreds of possible escape routes, but almost all ended in failure. With his remaining strength, he leapt onto an automated transport truck carrying experimental equipment. The vehicle smashed through a maintenance barrier and burst onto the surface highway. Hunter drones immediately followed, firing concentrated energy pulses that tore into the transport's armored frame. One blast struck Ax-9's left arm, ripping it away in a shower of sparks. Another shattered the truck's steering system. The vehicle spun wildly before crashing through a guardrail and tumbling down a rocky hillside toward the sprawling scrapyards outside New Haven. The explosion echoed across the metal hills. Mira froze outside her workshop as a column of black smoke rose into the evening sky. "Another factory accident?" she muttered. Curious, she grabbed a flashlight and cautiously followed the smoke. Twisted sheets of metal littered the crash site. Among the wreckage lay a massive silver figure half buried beneath broken machinery. Blue electrical sparks danced across his shattered body. His left arm was completely gone, exposing intricate mechanical structures beneath. The center of his chest had been violently torn open, leaving behind an empty circular chamber surrounded by damaged cables. Oil-like silver fluid slowly pooled beneath him. Mira instinctively stepped backward. "You're not human." The machine's glowing blue eyes flickered weakly. He tried to lift himself but collapsed again. In a distorted mechanical voice, he whispered, "Danger. Approaching. Leave. Now." The distant sound of aircraft engines rumbled through the night. Searchlights swept across the scrapyard while drones buzzed closer every second. Mira looked toward the sky, then back at the broken machine. Fear tightened her chest. Whoever was hunting him had enough firepower to destroy half the scrapyard. She could walk away and pretend she had never seen him. No one would blame her. Then she remembered her father's final lesson. The easiest thing in the world is walking away from something broken. The hardest, and the most important, is choosing to stay. She took a deep breath, grabbed one of the workshop's old cargo trolleys, and struggled to roll it beside the enormous machine. "You're heavier than you look," she groaned. The robot looked at her with fading eyes. "Why? Help." Mira pushed with all her strength until he finally rolled onto the trolley. "Because someone should." Together they disappeared into the darkness of the abandoned garage just as military searchlights swept across the crash site. Minutes later, lying on an old repair platform beneath a torn canvas cover, the machine's dim blue eyes suddenly opened wider than before. His sensors locked onto the frightened girl standing beside him. With the last of his remaining energy, he whispered a single warning. "Run." The old repair garage trembled as military aircraft roared low over the scrapyard. Powerful searchlights swept across mountains of rusted metal, illuminating twisted cranes, abandoned cargo haulers, and broken service robots. Mira immediately switched off every light inside the workshop and carefully covered the shattered windows with dusty tarps her father had once used during sandstorms. She held her breath as shadows moved across the cracked walls. On the repair platform, the alien machine lay completely still, silver fluid dripping steadily from the torn cavity in his chest. The single word he had spoken, "Run," still echoed in her mind. Instead of running, she quietly rolled an old storage cabinet in front of the garage door and whispered, "If they're looking for you, they won't stop because I leave." The robot's glowing eyes dimmed again as if every remaining unit of energy had been spent on that warning. Several minutes passed before the engines faded into the distance. Only then did Mira slowly approach the repair table. Up close, the machine looked even more damaged than she had first realized. His missing left arm had left exposed bundles of impossibly thin metallic fibers, each glowing faintly beneath transparent armor. The circular cavity in his chest was surrounded by jagged fractures that looked less like metal and more like broken crystal. She picked up a flashlight and carefully examined the damage. "I've repaired farming robots, delivery drones, even mining loaders," she muttered. "But I've never seen anything like you." She reached toward the exposed wiring before quickly pulling her hand back. "Okay, Mira, don't panic. Broken machines are just puzzles. Taking a deep breath, she opened her father's old toolbox and began cleaning away the debris lodged between the damaged components. Suddenly the robot's eyes flickered open again. His head turned sharply toward her with surprising speed. "Unknown. Biological entity detected," he said in a distorted mechanical voice. "Threat. Assessment. Incomplete." Mira nearly dropped her screwdriver. "Easy. I'm not going to hurt you." The machine tried to lift himself, but the effort caused violent sparks to erupt from his shoulder. His remaining arm collapsed beneath him. "Movement. Impossible," he said after a brief pause. "Core. Missing. Structural damage. Critical." Mira carefully stepped closer. "You're lucky I found you." The robot stared silently before replying, "Luck is a human concept." She couldn't help smiling. "Maybe, but I think you need some human luck right now." She spent the next hour cleaning damaged circuits and reconnecting fractured cables wherever she could. Many of the materials inside the robot were unlike anything she had ever touched. Tiny metallic strands shifted by themselves, almost as if they were alive. Every repair created another mystery. Eventually she found a loose energy conduit and carefully secured it using a clamp from an old construction drone. The moment it clicked into place, blue light spread across several sections of the robot's body. His breathing like mechanical hum became slightly steadier. Mira smiled proudly. "There, that wasn't so impossible." The robot looked down at the repaired connection. "Repair. Efficiency. Acceptable." She folded her arms. "Acceptable? That's your way of saying thank you?" After several seconds of silence, he answered, "Correction. Thank you." She laughed softly. "Much better." Deep beneath Project Black Vault, Colonel Victor Kane stood inside the command center watching dozens of holographic maps covering the walls. Red markers showed search teams combing every square kilometer surrounding New Haven. "Any trace?" he asked. A communications officer shook his head. "Negative, Colonel. The Guardian disappeared after the transport crash." Another officer spoke up. "Sir, we're detecting fragments of his energy signature inside the western scrapyards, but it's extremely weak." Kane narrowed his eyes. "He's damaged. Without his core, he won't survive for long. Expand the search. Question every scavenger, every mechanic, every resident living near the crash site." One scientist hesitated before asking, "Should we inform the public?" Kane answered immediately, "Absolutely not. The world cannot know we've kept an alien guardian imprisoned for 20 years." Morning sunlight filtered through the cracked skylight of the workshop. Mira had fallen asleep sitting beside the repair table with a wrench still in her hand. A soft electronic sound woke her. The robot was sitting upright for the first time. Though clearly weakened, he had managed to stabilize himself against the wall. "Good morning," Mira yawned. "Didn't think you'd still be here." The robot looked confused. "Destination unavailable." She chuckled. It was a joke. He tilted his head slightly. "Define joke." Mira blinked before laughing again. "Wow. You really don't know much about humans, do you?" He answered quietly, "My knowledge archives, damaged." There was no fear in his voice, only simple fact. For the first time, Mira realized he wasn't pretending to be emotionless. He genuinely didn't understand many of the things she took for granted. She placed a cup of water on the workbench before realizing what she'd done. "Sorry," she said awkwardly. "You probably don't drink water." The robot observed the cup. "Negative. Figures." She sat on a nearby stool. "Well, I'm Mira." He remained silent for several seconds before replying, "Designation AX9. Mira frowned. "That's not really a name." "It is. My assigned identification." She thought for a moment before smiling. "Then I'll call you Ax. It's shorter." The machine processed the statement. "Nickname accepted." Somehow hearing those words made the giant machine seem a little less frightening. As the day passed, Mira searched through the workshop for replacement parts. Most of her father's old equipment was obsolete, but she managed to salvage batteries, wiring, and small processors that could be adapted. Ax watched her work with growing curiosity. "Question," he finally said. "Why continue repairs? Probability of my complete restoration. Less than 2%. Mira tightened a bolt without looking up. "Because 2% isn't zero." Ax remained silent. "Besides," she continued, "my father used to say that people give up on broken things too quickly." The robot's eyes dimmed thoughtfully. People inside Black Vault did not share that philosophy. Mira stopped working. "They did this to you?" Axe answered slowly, as if struggling through corrupted memories. Repeated disassembly. Memory extraction. System failure. Reconstruction. Cycle repeated. He looked down at his damaged body. 21 Earth years. Mira felt a lump form in her throat. She whispered, "That's not research. That's torture." That evening, distant sirens echoed across the scrapyard again. Mira quietly peeked through a crack in the garage wall. Military trucks were moving between the piles of scrap while drones scanned every structure with bright blue sensors. Loudspeakers repeated the same announcement. "Attention! A dangerous experimental machine has escaped government custody. Report any suspicious activity immediately." Mira stepped back and looked at Axe. "They're calling you dangerous." Axe lowered his head. "Statistically, they're correct." "No," she replied firmly. "If you were dangerous, I would have been dead the moment I found you." Before he could answer, a piercing electronic pulse suddenly echoed inside his mind. His entire body froze. Strange blue symbols flashed across his eyes. Fragments of forgotten memories flooded back, towering crystal cities beneath alien stars, thousands of silver guardians standing together, and at the center of it all, a brilliant sphere of living light being torn away from his chest. Axe clutched the repair table with his remaining hand as his voice became barely more than a whisper. "The core." Mira rushed to his side. "Axe, what's happening?" He looked at her with genuine fear for the first time. "They still have it. And if they awaken it before I recover, everything will be lost." Sleep never came easily that night. Rain tapped softly against the workshop's rusted roof while the wind whistled through cracks in the old walls. Mira sat beside Axe with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching strange blue symbols continue to flicker across his eyes. Every few minutes he would freeze completely before whispering words she couldn't understand. Sometimes they sounded like names. Sometimes like places. Once, he quietly repeated the same sentence 3 times in an unfamiliar language before suddenly falling silent again. As dawn slowly brightened the skylight, his glowing eyes stabilized. He looked at Mira for several seconds before speaking. "Memory reconstruction. Partially successful." She leaned forward immediately. "Do you remember who you are now?" Axe nodded slowly. "More than before. But far less than I should." Mira handed him a notebook she usually used for repair sketches. "Start from the beginning," she said gently. "Maybe talking about it will help." Axe stared at the empty pages before speaking in a calm but distant voice. "My creators called themselves the architects. They did not build empires. They built civilizations. Their purpose was preservation, not conquest." Images appeared above his damaged wrist as tiny blue holograms flickered into existence. Mira watched in amazement as enormous crystal cities floated above oceans beneath twin suns. Elegant silver machines walked peacefully beside alien children of countless species. Towering libraries stretched into the clouds while glowing spacecraft drifted silently overhead. Thousands of worlds, Axe continued. Knowledge shared freely. Conflict resolved before war became necessary. Mira whispered, "It looks beautiful." The holograms suddenly glitched, dissolving into static. Axe lowered his hand. "Most of those memories are damaged." He remained silent for a long moment before continuing. "The architects understood one truth. Every civilization eventually reaches a choice. Rule through fear, or protect through compassion." Mira frowned thoughtfully. "So they built guardians like you?" Axe nodded. "Yes. We were never soldiers. We were caretakers. We protected archives, assisted colonies after disasters, and guided developing civilizations without controlling them." His voice became noticeably quieter. "Weapons were only a final defense." Mira looked at the massive holes in his armor. "Then why would anyone imprison you?" Axe answered without emotion. "Fear often transforms guardians into perceived threats." Meanwhile, several kilometers away inside Project Black Vault, technicians surrounded a circular containment chamber unlike any other in the facility. Suspended inside a transparent energy field floated a glowing sphere roughly the size of a human heart. Brilliant streams of blue and silver light moved endlessly across its surface like living veins. Colonel Victor Kane stood before it with folded arms. "Status?" he asked. A scientist adjusted several holographic displays. "The alien core remains stable. Energy output has increased by 11% since the Guardian escaped." Kane's expression hardened. "Why?" The scientist hesitated. We believe it may be attempting to reconnect with Ax-9 remotely. Kane stepped closer to the floating sphere. Can it communicate? Not yet, the scientist replied. But we're making progress. Tomorrow morning we'll begin the synchronization sequence. Kane smiled slightly. Excellent. Once we unlock its archive, humanity will possess knowledge no civilization has ever shared willingly. Back inside the workshop, Ax suddenly stiffened. His eyes widened. Synchronization, he whispered. Mira looked up. What is it? Ax slowly turned toward her. I remember now. His voice carried an urgency she had never heard before. The core is not merely my power source. He placed his remaining hand against the empty cavity in his chest. It contains my complete neural archive. My memories. My identity. Mira blinked. You mean, your mind? Correct. He looked down. Everything that makes me remains inside that chamber. Mira struggled to process the thought. Then you've been living without your own memories all this time? Ax answered quietly. Only fragments stored in secondary systems. If Black Vault activates the core independently. His sentence stopped. Mira waited. What happens? Ax finally answered. They will awaken an intelligence that cannot distinguish friend from enemy. It will believe I am dead. Silence filled the workshop. Mira slowly sat back in her chair. Then we had to get it back. Ax immediately shook his head. Negative. Why? Probability of success. Extremely low. He projected another hologram showing the underground structure of Black Vault. Multiple security rings surrounded the central laboratory. Automated defense turrets, biometric scanners, drone hangars, and armored checkpoints filled nearly every corridor. The facility contains over 400 personnel. My combat systems remain offline. My mobility is limited. Your survival probability during infiltration is below 6%. Mira stared at the projection. You've been calculating this already. Since memory restoration began, and you decided not to tell me? Ax looked directly at her. Your continued survival has become a priority. Mira couldn't help smiling despite the danger. You're worried about me. Statement. Accurate. She stood up and began pacing across the workshop. My father always said impossible jobs only look impossible because people stop thinking after the first problem. Ax watched quietly. You are proposing direct infiltration. No, she replied. I'm proposing that we first learn everything we can. She pointed toward the hologram. Security changes. Guard schedules change. Deliveries happen every day. Even secret bases need supplies. Ax tilted his head slightly. You intend reconnaissance. Mira grinned. Exactly. See? You're already learning to think like a mechanic instead of a soldier. For the first time since she had found him, the corners of Ax's mouth moved almost imperceptibly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. Over the next 3 days, Mira transformed their desperate situation into a careful investigation. Each morning she entered New Haven carrying repaired electronics to sell, just as she always had. No one suspected she spent her afternoons quietly observing supply convoys traveling toward the military district. She memorized delivery schedules, photographed employee identification badges from a distance using an old camera lens, and listened carefully whenever mechanics complained about government maintenance contracts. Every evening she returned to the workshop and spread her notes across the workbench while Ax analyzed the information. Delivery trucks arrive every second morning, Mira explained one night. Maintenance crews change shifts at exactly 8 o'clock. Ax overlaid her handwritten notes with his partial memory of the facility's internal layout. Consistent. Probability of unnoticed entry, increasing. During those evenings, their conversations gradually became less formal. While repairing damaged circuitry inside Ax's shoulder, Mira asked, Do your people have families? Ax thought for several seconds. Architect guardians were created, not born. Yet we considered one another companions. Mira tightened a bolt. That sounds a lot like family. Ax looked at her thoughtfully. Perhaps. She smiled. See? You're getting better at human conversations. He replied, Your instruction has been beneficial. Mira laughed. I'll take that as another thank you. Late on the 4th evening, Ax suddenly froze again. Blue light spread rapidly through the damaged circuits across his chest. He looked toward the city skyline as though hearing a distant voice. The synchronization has accelerated, he whispered. How do you know? Mira asked. The core is calling for me. His expression became grim. Tomorrow morning. Mira felt her stomach tighten. Tomorrow? Axe nodded. If they complete the synchronization sequence, the archive will permanently separate from my remaining systems. Recovery may become impossible. Mira slowly rolled up the map lying on the workbench and placed it inside her backpack. Axe watched her with growing concern. What are you doing? She picked up her father's toolbox and clipped it to her belt. Getting ready. For what? She met his glowing blue eyes without hesitation. Tomorrow morning, we're going to Black Vault. Axe stood abruptly despite the pain surging through his damaged body. Mira, no. The mission exceeds acceptable risk. She looked at him with quiet determination. Maybe, but leaving your heart behind isn't an option. Outside, beyond the scrapyard, the lights of Black Vault burned against the night like the eyes of a waiting predator. Unaware that a lonely girl and a broken guardian had just decided to challenge one of the most heavily protected facilities on Earth. Before sunrise, a thick layer of fog drifted across the scrapyards, wrapping rusted cranes and abandoned machines in ghostly silence. Inside the old repair workshop, Mira spread a faded city map across her father's workbench while Axe watched from the repair platform. His damaged body had been patched as much as possible, but every movement still produced a faint metallic groan. Mira checked the contents of her backpack one last time. A stolen maintenance uniform, insulated gloves, repair tools, a portable signal jammer she had built from salvaged drone parts, and a small flashlight. If everything goes according to plan, she said quietly, I go inside with the morning maintenance crew, find your core, and leave before anyone notices. Axe's glowing eyes remained fixed on her. Probability of the plan proceeding exactly as intended, 12%. Mira smiled. That's better than 6. Axe stepped closer despite the pain. If you are discovered, abandon the mission immediately. She looked up at him. Only if you promise the same. After a long pause, he replied, I cannot make that promise. An hour later, Mira stood beside a line of maintenance workers waiting outside Black Vault's western service entrance. Heavy rain had begun to fall, forcing everyone to keep their heads lowered beneath gray hoods. She carried an old toolbox just like the others, trying not to reveal how fast her heart was racing. Massive concrete walls surrounded the facility, crowned with automated defense turrets and surveillance drones that circled endlessly overhead. Every worker passed through facial scanners and identity checkpoints before entering. Mira silently thanked herself for spending days observing the routine. She knew exactly when distracted supervisors changed shifts. As one guard argued with a delivery driver over paperwork, she slipped behind another mechanic carrying a large equipment cart. The biometric scanner briefly malfunctioned under the interference from her homemade jammer, flashing yellow instead of red. The security officer frowned at the screen before waving her through impatiently. Mira resisted the urge to run. One step at a time, she disappeared into the underground corridors of Black Vault. Outside the facility, Axe remained hidden inside an abandoned drainage tunnel overlooking the service road. Rainwater dripped steadily through cracks in the ceiling as he monitored Myra's location using the weak transmitter concealed inside her toolbox. Every few seconds the signal flickered. His processors calculated hundreds of possible rescue scenarios, and every one ended the same way, with Myra's capture or death. Mission unacceptable, he whispered to himself. Yet turning back was no longer an option. Somewhere deep beneath the mountain, his stolen core was waiting. Inside the facility, Mira moved carefully through brightly lit maintenance corridors while technicians hurried past carrying data tablets and equipment cases. No one paid attention to another repair worker pushing a toolbox trolley. She quietly counted corridor numbers exactly as Axe had described. Sector D, left. Then Elevator 3, she murmured under her breath. When she reached the restricted laboratory wing, she ducked into a supply closet just as two armed soldiers approached. Their conversation drifted through the partially open door. The synchronization starts in less than an hour, one soldier said. Colonel Kane wants every entrance sealed. The second soldier nodded. Once they unlock that alien archive, everything changes. Their footsteps faded. Mira exhaled slowly. I really hope you're right about this map, Axe. Back in the drainage tunnel, Axe suddenly received Myra's whispered transmission through the hidden communicator. I'm at the laboratory level. Relief washed through his damaged systems. Proceed carefully. Security density has increased. Mira answered softly, I noticed. Then the signal briefly crackled before cutting out completely. Axe immediately looked upward. A surveillance drone had changed its patrol route and was hovering directly above the tunnel entrance. He remained perfectly motionless while its scanners swept across the area. After several tense seconds, the drone continued on its route. Axe quietly stepped out into the rain. Signal interference increasing. I must move closer. Meanwhile, Mira reached a circular laboratory protected by a transparent energy barrier. Inside the chamber floated the glowing sphere she had seen only in Axe's holograms. Even through the reinforced glass, its blue light filled the room with an almost peaceful warmth. Scientists worked around the chamber while holographic equations drifted through the air. Mira hid behind a storage cabinet, waiting. Moments later, an emergency call echoed through the laboratory. Attention all personnel. Power fluctuation detected in reactor section 2. Half the scientists hurried from the room, leaving only a handful behind. Mira smiled slightly. Thank you, old power grid. During her reconnaissance, she had discovered that Black Vault still relied on aging electrical infrastructure connected to the city's industrial network. Earlier that morning she had deliberately overloaded one of the external transformers using a modified scrapyard battery. The disruption was minor, but it was enough. She quietly slipped into the chamber while the remaining scientists focused on their consoles. Kneeling beside the containment controls, she opened her father's toolbox. Please let these wires make sense, she whispered. The alien technology was unlike anything she had repaired before, but energy fields still required power regulators. After carefully reconnecting 2 circuits and reversing a magnetic relay, the glowing barrier flickered. The floating sphere slowly descended into its containment cradle. Mira wrapped it inside an insulated fabric pouch and placed it gently into her backpack. Got you, she breathed. The alarm sounded immediately. Red emergency lights flooded every corridor as automated voices echoed throughout the facility. Critical containment breach. Archive core removed. Full lockdown initiated. Heavy blast doors slammed shut across the complex. Myra's eyes widened. No. She grabbed her backpack and sprinted toward the nearest maintenance corridor. Behind her, soldiers poured into the laboratory while security drones launched from ceiling compartments. Stop, one officer shouted. Blue energy bolts struck the walls around her as she ducked through a closing doorway. Outside, Axe heard the distant alarms reverberating through the mountain. Every warning signal confirmed his greatest fear. Mira. Without hesitation, he forced open a maintenance hatch and entered the facility through an underground drainage conduit. Every step sent waves of pain through his damaged body. Warning messages flashed across his vision. Power reserves, 18%. Mobility failure imminent. He ignored them all. Mira reached an intersection only to find 2 blast doors sealing shut ahead of her. She turned toward another corridor and froze. 3 security drones floated silently into view, their weapon systems already charging. She backed away instinctively. I don't suppose we can talk this out, she muttered nervously. The drones answered by raising their plasma emitters. A blur of silver slammed into them from the side. Axe crashed through a maintenance wall in a shower of concrete and twisted steel. Using only his remaining arm, he hurled one drone into another before ripping a power conduit from the wall. Instead of attacking the soldiers racing toward him, he jammed the sparking cable into an electrical junction. The corridor instantly went dark. Emergency lights failed. Security doors froze halfway closed. Confused voices echoed through the darkness. Power failure. Backup systems offline. Axe grabbed Myra's arm. Move. Together they sprinted through smoke-filled maintenance passages while automated systems malfunctioned around them. Colonel Kane watched the chaos unfold from the command center. Instead of shouting in anger, he studied the security footage with remarkable calm. On one monitor, he saw the broken Guardian deliberately avoiding lethal force despite being surrounded. On another, he watched a frightened young girl risk everything to protect a machine that had every reason to hate humanity. Kane slowly removed his glasses. Interesting, he murmured. Then he turned to his officers. Lock every exit. Deploy aerial surveillance across the entire scrapyard. An officer asked, recover the Guardian? Kane's expression hardened. Recover both of them. Far above the underground facility, the storm intensified as Mira and Axe disappeared into the rain carrying the glowing core, unaware that every military unit in the region was now hunting not only the alien Guardian, but also the courageous girl who had chosen to save him. The journey back to the scrapyard was far more difficult than escaping Black Vault. Rain hammered the cracked windshield of the abandoned delivery van Mira had managed to steal during the chaos. Axe sat motionless in the back, clutching the insulated pouch that contained his glowing core. Every few minutes his systems emitted warning tones that grew weaker each time. His damaged processors had been pushed far beyond their limits during the rescue, and without the core safely reinstalled, his condition continued to deteriorate. Mira glanced into the rearview mirror. "Stay with me, Axe." His reply came after several seconds. "Power reserves, 9%. Mira tightened her grip on the steering wheel. 9 is still more than 0. Axe almost repeated his usual statistical response but stopped himself. Instead, he quietly said, "You continue to surprise me." By the time they reached the abandoned workshop, dawn had broken over the endless scrapyard. The peaceful silence lasted only a few moments before military aircraft appeared on the horizon. Searchlights swept across mountains of twisted metal while armored transports rolled through the maze of rusting machinery below. Loudspeakers echoed across the wasteland. "Attention! This area is under military quarantine. All civilians must evacuate immediately." Mira peeked through a cracked window and counted at least a dozen vehicles. "They found us faster than I expected." Axe slowly stood beside her. His movements were noticeably slower than before. "Colonel Kane anticipated our destination." Mira turned toward him. "Can we still use the repair chamber?" Axe nodded once. "It lies beneath this workshop. My internal maps confirm the entrance." He looked toward the floor beneath the old workbench. "Your father unknowingly built his workshop directly above an architect maintenance facility." Mira stared in disbelief. "Dad knew something was here?" Axe carefully knelt beside the dusty workbench and pointed toward a rusted metal plate bolted into the concrete floor. Strange geometric markings had been hidden beneath decades of dust and oil stains. He likely discovered fragments, but not their purpose. Together they pried away the heavy plate using crowbars and an old hydraulic jack. Beneath it lay a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Ancient blue lights flickered to life one after another as Axe stepped onto the first stair. "It still recognizes architect signatures," he whispered. Mira followed close behind, shining her flashlight along walls carved from smooth white stone unlike anything built by humans. The staircase eventually opened into an enormous underground chamber. Crystal pillars stretched toward a ceiling lost in darkness, while elegant machines rested silently around a circular platform at the center of the room. Despite millions of years underground, everything appeared untouched by time. As Axe approached the central platform, blue light spread across its surface like ripples on water. Ancient symbols illuminated the chamber. A calm mechanical voice echoed gently through the air. "Guardian AX9. Identity partially verified. Core restoration sequence available." Mira looked around in amazement. "It still works." Axe carefully removed the glowing sphere from the insulated pouch and placed it into a circular cradle at the center of the platform. Instantly, beams of shimmering light surrounded both the core and his damaged body. "Restoration process initiated," the ancient voice announced. "Estimated completion time: 3 hours and 21 minutes. Myra's hopeful expression faded. 3 hours? Axe looked at her apologetically. "The process cannot be accelerated." "And if someone interrupts it?" she asked. "Restoration will fail, permanently." Before either of them could say another word, distant explosions echoed from above. Dust drifted from the chamber ceiling as heavy vehicles rolled into the scrapyard. Mira rushed to a security display that had suddenly activated beside the platform. Holographic images revealed dozens of soldiers surrounding the workshop. Combat drones hovered overhead while engineers unloaded portable scanners. Colonel Victor Kane stepped out of an armored vehicle and calmly surveyed the abandoned garage. "They're here," Mira whispered. Axe attempted to leave the platform, but glowing restraints of light surrounded him. "Movement impossible until restoration concludes." Mira looked from the display to the helpless Guardian. "Then I'll keep them busy." Axe immediately objected. "Negative. Survival probability remains unacceptable." Mira smiled faintly as she grabbed her father's toolbox. "You once told me impossible jobs only had a 12% chance." Axe tilted his head in confusion. "Correction. You told me that." Within minutes, soldiers forced open the workshop doors above. Finding the hidden staircase, they cautiously descended into the underground chamber. Before they reached the bottom, the first trap activated. Mira had rerouted power to an old magnetic crane that still rested above the scrapyard decades after her father's death. The enormous electromagnet suddenly tore hundreds of rusted metal beams from nearby scrap piles, sending them crashing into the workshop entrance. The soldiers stumbled backward as the staircase became partially blocked. "Engineering team," one officer shouted. "Clear the debris." Mira didn't wait. She activated another switch. Broken construction robots she had repaired over the years lurched to life, not to attack, but to push massive piles of scrap across the narrow entrance, slowing the soldiers even further. Down in the chamber, Axe could do nothing but watch the security displays. Every minute felt endless. Blue energy slowly flowed from the restored core into his damaged body, repairing shattered systems one by one. His left arm had begun rebuilding itself from streams of metallic nanostructures, but the process remained incomplete. "Mira," he whispered through the communicator, "multiple drones approaching your position." Her cheerful voice answered despite the explosions around her. "Already noticed." She pressed another homemade switch hidden beneath the workshop floor. A series of old industrial EMP generators, machines her father had once used for recycling electronic waste, released a coordinated pulse across the scrapyard. The drones immediately lost power, dropping harmlessly from the sky like metal rain. Mira laughed breathlessly. "Dad always said never throw away useful junk." Colonel Kane watched the unfolding battle with growing respect rather than anger. He slowly removed his cap before walking alone toward the workshop entrance. "Hold your fire," he ordered his soldiers. Confused officers lowered their weapons. Kane descended through the damaged staircase until he reached the chamber entrance, where Mira stood holding nothing more dangerous than a heavy wrench. She looked exhausted, covered in dust and grease, yet refused to move aside. Kane spoke calmly. "You're brave," Mira answered firmly. "I'm not letting you take him." Kane sighed. "You think I'm the villain because you've only seen one side of this story." He gestured toward the glowing platform where Axe remained trapped inside the restoration field. "If another alien civilization arrives tomorrow with hostile intentions, what will defend humanity? Hope? Kindness?" Mira remained silent. Kane continued, "I have spent my entire career preparing for dangers the public doesn't even know exist. Everything I've done has been to protect our world." Mira tightened her grip on the wrench but didn't raise it. "Maybe you believe that," she replied quietly. "But protecting people by hurting someone who never attacked you isn't protection." Kane looked toward Axe. "He is not human." Mira immediately answered, "Neither was my father when people stopped caring about him after the mine collapsed. They called him another statistic." Her voice trembled slightly. "He's alive. He feels pain. That's enough for me." Kane studied her face for several silent moments. Before he could reply, the entire chamber shook violently. Brilliant blue light erupted from the restoration platform, flooding every corner of the ancient vault. The calm mechanical voice echoed once more. "Core reintegration. 99% complete." Axe slowly opened his eyes as streams of radiant energy flowed through his rebuilt body. His systems were awakening, but the restoration had not yet fully finished. Everyone in the chamber, soldiers, Mira, and Colonel Kane alike, stood frozen, waiting to see what the restored Guardian would choose to do next. The chamber fell silent as the brilliant blue light surrounding the restoration platform slowly faded. One by one, the glowing restraints dissolved into countless particles that drifted through the air like tiny stars before disappearing. Axe remained motionless for several seconds with his eyes closed. Then his rebuilt left hand slowly flexed. Every damaged plate across his silver body sealed flawlessly into place, while elegant blue lines flowed beneath his armor with a steady, living glow. The violent cracks that had covered his chest vanished as the restored core settled into its rightful place. For the first time since escaping Black Vault, he stood without pain, without hesitation, and without warning alarms echoing through his mind. The ancient voice filled the chamber once more. "Guardian AX-9. Restoration complete. Neural archive synchronized. Identity confirmed." Axe opened his eyes. They no longer flickered weakly. They shone with a calm, radiant blue that illuminated the chamber itself. Mira smiled with relief, but before she could speak, dozens of soldiers raised their weapons toward Axe. Red targeting lasers covered his chest while combat drones descended from the ceiling. Colonel Kane slowly stepped backward. "Guardian," he said firmly, "I know you're fully operational now. I won't ask you to surrender. But understand this. If you attack, my men will defend themselves." Mira immediately moved between the soldiers and Axe. "No," she shouted. "Don't shoot." One nervous soldier tightened his finger on the trigger. "Sir, he's activating." Kane raised a hand. "Hold your fire." Every person in the chamber waited. Even the ancient machines remained silent. Axe looked around the room, studying every frightened face. His restored memories stretched across millions of years, yet the clearest image in his mind was not an ancient architect city. It was a lonely girl dragging a broken machine through a scrapyard because she refused to abandon him. He slowly raised his right hand. Instantly, every weapon in the chamber powered down. Plasma rifles went dark. Combat drones gently settled onto the floor. Armored vehicles visible through the entrance tunnel shut themselves off one after another. The soldiers looked at their useless weapons in disbelief. Axe had not destroyed them. He had simply disabled every hostile system without harming a single person. Colonel Kane stared at the powerless rifle in his hands before looking back at Axe. "You could have destroyed us," he said quietly. Axe nodded once. "Affirmative. Then why didn't you?" Axe's answer echoed calmly through the chamber. "Because my creators did not build executioners." He stepped away from the platform and faced everyone present. "The architects believed fear creates temporary obedience. Compassion creates lasting peace." Kane lowered his rifle completely. "If that's true, then why hide your technology from younger civilizations?" Axe turned toward the towering crystal pillar behind him. "We did not hide. We waited." As though responding to his words, the enormous crystal pillars surrounding the chamber burst into life. Streams of blue light climbed toward the ceiling while ancient symbols rotated across every surface. A magnificent holographic figure appeared above the platform, formed entirely from shimmering light. It resembled neither a human nor any known species, constantly shifting through countless forms before settling into a peaceful silhouette. The voice that followed was gentle, carrying neither anger nor authority. "To the people of Earth," it said, "we are the architects." Every soldier instinctively lowered their heads. Mira looked around in astonishment. Is this real?" Axe answered softly. "A recorded consciousness. Older than your civilization." The luminous figure continued. "Every developing civilization eventually discovers fragments of those who came before. Most choose to weaponize that knowledge. Some choose to preserve it. We never judged civilizations by their strength, their intelligence, or their military achievements." The hologram slowly turned toward Mira. "We judged them by how they treated the powerless." The chamber grew completely still. One guardian, stripped of memory and broken beyond function, was shown mercy by one child who expected nothing in return. She risked her safety, her freedom, and her life for a stranger. The hologram paused before speaking the words that changed everything. "Humanity has passed the first trial." Far above the underground chamber, the skies over Earth suddenly filled with streaks of brilliant blue light. Hidden beneath deserts, oceans, mountains, and frozen ice, ancient architect stations that had remained dormant for millions of years awakened one after another. Around distant moons and forgotten asteroids, silent observatories illuminated the darkness. Across the solar system, ancient machines transmitted a single peaceful signal toward the stars. In the underground chamber, holographic images of these awakening stations surrounded everyone present. Soldiers who had spent their careers preparing for invasion watched in speechless amazement as no fleets appeared, no weapons activated, and no attacks came. Instead, the hologram spoke once more. "To civilizations that choose compassion before conquest, we offer friendship." Colonel Kane slowly removed the insignia from his uniform and looked down at it. For decades he had believed humanity's only hope was to seize power before someone else did. Yet the greatest technological inheritance in history had been unlocked not by military strength, but by the kindness of a 13-year-old girl carrying an old toolbox. He walked toward Mira and quietly held out the identification badge that had symbolized his authority. "I owe you an apology," he said. Mira looked surprised. Kane continued, "I convinced myself that protecting humanity meant controlling everything I feared. Somewhere along the way, I forgot what I was trying to protect." Mira accepted the badge but gently placed it back into his hand. Then don't spend the rest of your life feeling guilty, she replied. Spend it fixing what went wrong. Kane looked at her for a long moment before nodding. Perhaps that's the harder choice. Several weeks later, the old scrapyard no longer felt abandoned. The military had withdrawn, Project Black Vault had been placed under international oversight, and the ancient chamber beneath the workshop became a center for peaceful scientific cooperation rather than secret experiments. Above it, Mira reopened her father's repair garage. The faded sign over the entrance had been repainted by hand. It now read, Second Chance Repairs. Children from nearby neighborhoods arrived carrying broken toy robots, damaged helper drones, and worn-out household machines. Mira greeted each customer with the same smile her father once wore. Beside her, Axe patiently repaired machines too delicate for human hands while occasionally answering endless questions from curious children. One little boy looked up at the towering guardian and asked, "Were you really built by aliens?" Axe glanced toward Mira before replying with what had become his favorite human expression. It's a long story. As evening settled over New Haven, Mira and Axe stood outside the workshop watching the first stars appear above the city. Tiny blue lights crossed the heavens as distant architect stations silently took their places among the constellations, not as rulers, but as guardians once again. Mira folded her arms and smiled. So, what happens now? Axe looked at the stars, then back at the workshop filled with laughter and repaired machines. For millions of years, he said quietly, I believed my purpose was to protect civilizations. He paused before looking at the girl who had saved him when everyone else had given up. You taught me something my creators always hoped we would learn. Mira tilted her head. What's that? A gentle smile finally appeared on Axe's face. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can save an entire world. Mira laughed softly. Then I guess we'll keep fixing broken things. Side by side, the girl and the guardian walked back into the warm light of the workshop, proving that the future of humanity had not been secured by the strongest weapon ever built, but by the simple courage of one girl who refused to let a broken stranger die.